Have you ever met someone who judged you before even hearing your voice? Someone who decided you're worth the moment they saw your skin or heard your accent? It was another hot morning in Texas when Aamir Khan walked into Miller Construction, his lunchbox in one hand and dreams in the other. His English wasn't perfect, but his work spoke louder than any words ever could. The walls he built stood straight, and the roofs he fixed never leaked. But that wasn't enough for David Miller, his boss, a man who saw color before character. From the very first day, David's eyes followed Aamir with suspicion. "You people work cheap, but you don't last," he said one afternoon, pretending it was a joke. Aamir just smiled politely, like he always did. He needed this job. His son back home depended on him. Lisa noticed it all, the unfair comments, the long hours, the small paycheck. She'd whisper, "You deserve better, Aamir," but he'd always reply, "Ma'am, one day truth will speak." Then came the day everything began to change. The company landed a big contract, a luxury mansion on the edge of town. Everyone was excited except David. When he found out Aamir would lead the foundation team, his face turned cold. "An immigrant leading my site. Over my dead body," he barked. But Aamir didn't argue. He only bowed his head and went back to work. Every brick he laid that week was filled with silent strength, the kind born from years of being looked down on, yet never giving up. Tom, the only worker who treated Aamir fairly, said one night, "Man, I don't get how you stay calm with all this." Aamir looked up at the stars and whispered, "When people throw hate, I build walls strong enough to protect myself." But David wasn't done. The following week, during a safety inspection, something went wrong, terribly wrong. As Aamir climbed the scaffold to fix a loose beam, a loud crack echoed. The platform gave way. He fell hard, bruised but alive. David stood below, arms crossed, smirking. "Guess immigrants don't know American safety, huh?" Lisa gasped. Tom helped Aamir up. But in that moment, Aamir saw something in David's eyes, not just hatred, fear. Fear of something Aamir hadn't yet revealed. What was David so afraid of? The truth was waiting to break free. If you believe no one deserves to be judged by their race or accent, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Have you ever wondered why some people fear those they can't understand? Why they hate what they've never even tried to know? The morning after the accident, the construction site was quiet. Aamir arrived early, bandaged arm, eyes tired but calm. David walked past him, pretending not to notice, but there was a stiffness in his step. For the first time, his voice didn't carry the same authority. Lisa brought Aamir a cup of coffee. "You should rest," she said softly. Aamir smiled faintly. "If I rest, the bills don't." The workers admired his courage, but David, he couldn't stop thinking about that fall. It wasn't guilt that bothered him, it was curiosity. During the chaos, he'd seen something on Aamir's arm, a small tattoo, half hidden under the dust and blood. It looked like a military symbol, one David had seen years ago when he served as a reserve officer. That night he opened his laptop and searched. The symbol matched a Pakistani Special Forces insignia. He frowned. What the hell was a man like him doing here? The next morning, David called Aamir into his office. The air was thick. "Tell me something," he said, leaning forward. "You some kind of soldier back home?" Aamir hesitated. "Once," he said quietly. "Long time ago." David scoffed. "So what are you doing here?" "Couldn't handle real life." Aamir's eyes met his, calm and steady. "Sometimes life teaches you humility by taking everything first." Lisa overheard from outside. She could feel the tension. David's tone turned sharper. "This is America, Khan. You follow my rules here. Don't think your old war stories impress anyone." Aamir stood up slowly. "I follow the rules everywhere, Mr. Miller. But respect is not a rule, it's earned." When he left, David felt something strange, anger mixed with discomfort. For the first time, the man he looked down on wasn't silent. Later that week, the company hosted a small gathering to celebrate the halfway mark of the mansion project. Everyone was there. David raised his glass, bragging about how far his business had come. Then the client, a retired Navy officer, noticed Aamir and walked over with a surprised smile. "Aamir Khan," the man said loudly. "Captain Aamir Khan, the hero from the Karachi rescue." The room fell silent. Everyone turned. David's face went pale. Aamir looked humbled, almost embarrassed. "That was a long time ago, sir." But the officer continued, "You saved American soldiers during that mission. You're a legend in joint operations." David's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Lisa watched the scene unfold, and in that moment she knew the truth had begun to surface. David's fear wasn't just racism. It was the terror of being small in front of someone he'd always tried to humiliate. Because sometimes the man you try to bury is the same man who once saved lives like yours. If you believe true worth comes from actions, not skin color or accent, subscribe now. The storm is just beginning. Have you ever seen pride turn into shame in just one heartbeat? When the person who looked down on others suddenly realizes he's the one standing lowest. The day after the party, everyone at Miller Construction whispered about what they had learned. Aamir Khan, the quiet immigrant David mocked, wasn't just a worker. He was a former captain, a man who'd saved American soldiers during a dangerous rescue mission overseas. But David refused to believe it. His ego wouldn't let him. "It's all fake," he snapped at Lisa. "He probably made that story up. These people always do." Lisa didn't answer. She had seen the client's respect, the look in his eyes that wasn't a lie. She simply said, "Sometimes truth doesn't need your belief, David." Meanwhile, Aamir kept working as if nothing had changed. He didn't want fame, just peace, but peace never lasts where hate still lives. Later that afternoon, as the rain began to fall, David stormed toward the construction site. "Pack your tools," he shouted at Aamir. "You're fired." The workers froze. Tom stepped forward. "For what, boss?" "He did nothing wrong." David's voice trembled with anger. "I said he's done here. I can't have a liar working for me." Aamir looked at him quietly. The rain hit his face, washing away the dust, but not the pain. "You can take away my job," he said softly, "but you can't take away what I've lived for." David turned and stomped away, drenched and furious. But as he entered his office, a car pulled up. The same retired Navy officer stepped out, holding an envelope. "David Miller," he asked coldly, "you fired a decorated ally, the man who risked his life for our troops." David swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't know or didn't care," the officer interrupted. "We are terminating the mansion contract. I can't support a company that treats a hero like trash." Those words hit David like thunder. The rain outside turned heavier, pounding against the windows as his world began to collapse. He watched through the glass as Aamir walked away from the site, slow and steady, his figure fading into the storm. Lisa found David sitting in silence. "You just lost everything," she said softly. David didn't reply. His eyes were distant, not just filled with regret, but something deeper, guilt. That night, as the storm raged on, he couldn't sleep. Every sound of thunder reminded him of his own words, his cruelty, his blind hatred. He picked up his phone, found Aamir's number, but couldn't bring himself to call. The next morning, a newspaper headline would shake him even more and force him to face a truth he could never escape. If you believe karma always finds its way, hit that subscribe button. Chapter 4 will show how truth finally destroys pride. Have you ever realized too late that the person you tried to break was the only one strong enough to forgive you? The storm had passed, but David Miller's world was still drowning. The mansion deal was gone. Half his workers had quit. The company that once stood tall now sat silent, a graveyard of broken pride. David sat at his desk, staring at the newspaper on his table. The front page story read, "Pakistani ex-soldier saves lives again. Former Captain Aamir Khan helps rescue flood victims." The picture below showed Aamir in muddy clothes, carrying an old woman on his back through chest-deep water. His face was calm, focused, humble, the same man David had once called a liar. David's hands trembled. Every word burned his conscience. He couldn't believe that while he was sitting in regret, the man he humiliated was out there helping others again. Lisa entered quietly. "He's back at the shelter near the highway," she said. "He's been helping flood families for days." David hesitated, then grabbed his coat. He drove through the muddy roads, heart heavy with guilt. When he reached the shelter, he saw Aamir kneeling beside a small child, wrapping a blanket around him. The boy smiled. David stepped closer. Aamir, his voice cracked. Aamir turned, surprised but calm. Mr. Miller, David's throat tightened. I came to say I'm sorry for everything. The words, the hate, the way I treated you, I was wrong. Aamir looked at him for a long moment. The air was still, filled only with the faint sounds of rain dripping from the roof. Then he said quietly, hate is heavy, Mr. Miller. When you carry it too long, it breaks you before it breaks others. David's eyes filled with tears. Can you forgive me? Aamir smiled faintly. Forgiveness is easy when you stop seeing enemies and start seeing people. They stood there in silence, two men from different worlds, bound by a moment of truth. David reached out his hand. Aamir shook it firmly, his eyes steady. As David turned to leave, Lisa appeared, holding a donation box. She smiled at Aamir. You really are a hero, she said. Aamir shook his head. No, ma'am. I just try to build wherever life breaks. Later that evening, as the sun finally peeked through the clouds, David looked at the shelter one last time before driving away. He didn't just leave behind his guilt. He left behind the man he used to be. Because sometimes the biggest victory isn't in fighting others, but in changing yourself. If you believe the world needs more people like Aamir, people who heal instead of hate, hit that subscribe button. Because every story here reminds us, humanity is stained, but it's not lost.